It is 19 hours 30 all across this beautiful, chilly country that we call Guyana. Happy Friday to everyone. Remember, you can catch us on Kaiju Radio on Facebook, and also we're streaming on a Kaiju Radio live stream on YouTube. Remember, you can also keep us in your pocket on the apps My Tuner app and the Radio Garden app. Remember, we're also streaming again on www.kaijunewsonline.com. Yes, that is Kaiju Radio. 99.1 and 99.5 FM. I can see this evening's host being angry slowly, bit by bit, because I am carrying on, and hey, that's okay. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, this is Room 592 with Dr. Yog Mahadeo and senior journalist of Kaiju News, Mr. Leonard Gildarie. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening to you, Mr. Kevin Smith, and good evening to the entire technical crew, Raj, Josh, Kevin, and everybody at Kaiju Radio. And a pleasant good evening to Mr. Wesley Gibbens, who I haven't seen personally in a long time, and it so happened because of COVID, I can't see you personally anyhow.
Yes, good seeing you, though.
Yes, same here. And of course, seeing my brother, Mr. Orin Gordon Guyanese, is born, but now seems to not want to come home at all. He's liking the Trinidad. Orin, how are you?
I am very well, thank you.
Thank you.
One of these days, Dr. Mahadeo, one of these days.
Great. And of course, my co-host, Mr. Leonard Gildarie. Sir, how are you, and how is Wickham, Guyana going, sir?
It's missing you. It was a little cold today, but guess what? We have wonderful people, and whether it is cold or it's hot, they're going to be there. But I want to say a good night also to Mr. Wesley Gibbens. I haven't seen him for a very long time. I think we did butt heads in Trinidad a couple of years back when there was a journalist. Greetings again, my dear friend, and of course, Mr. Gordon, how are you? And everybody joining us. Thank you very much.
And ladies and gentlemen, we are supposed to be having Mr. Peter Wickham. Well, there he is. And Mr. Wickham, let me apologize. You know, Leonard, this past, Peter, here is what. My excuse is as follows. After having gone through 155 days of Guyanese type elections, with all the numbers thrown at us, my apologies that 1930 became 2030. But you are here, sir. And
no problem, that's fine.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to each and every one of you to Room 592, where we unleash the truth. And tonight we want to talk a little bit about Trinidadian politics. As you know, this Caribbean region and its ongoings is of interest to every one of us, not just here in Guyana, but across the Caribbean. Just before I get going to our brothers from Trinidad, and of course, I'm going to say in this case, Orin is Trinidadians as they come, and Peter is Trinidadian as they come. We have one true Trini to the bone here, and he is no other than the president of the association. He is, I should not just say Association of Caribbean Media. I should not just say media personality, but Wesley Gibbens, I think, reflects, ladies and gentlemen, what is a passion in the heartbeat of Caribbean media. A man who has stood by and stood for an independent media, yet an independent media that provides a high degree of professionalism to its work. And Leonard, you may not know this, but when we first started Insight magazine here in Guyana, Mr. Wesley Gibbens he was overseeing everything. He had the oversight of Insight. And so one of the things I remember him being keen on is the font we select, the spacing we select, the words we choose, the paragraphing methodology, the headlines. They're all extremely important in print media. And I would never forget some of those words. And Wesley, it is a pleasure to see you here. But before I come to you, Mr. Gibbons and Mr. Gordon and Mr. Wickham, ladies and gentlemen, let me just say this, and let me just give a Yog Mahadeo perspective on August 10th in 60 seconds. Information coming to us today is that Joe Harmon has applied for some 42 days leave starting on August 10th, 2020. Leave from what? Leave for what? Indeed, Is Mr. Joe Harmon indicating that he wishes to serve under the PPPC government? We don't know. Is it yet another attempt at gaslighting, something that Harmon has been quite adept at for over 155 days since March elections? Is it another case, ladies and gentlemen, like the state properties matter? Is he trying to create a scenario from which Joe will cry, victimization? And so, ladies and gentlemen, as my 60 seconds wrap up ends, I must say the political games continue at the expense of the taxpayers. And that remains the saddest thing that has come out of the APNU AFC once the government of Guyana today in opposition. And ladies and gentlemen, with that being said, I want to share with you a word for the weekend, and that is demagogue. A demagogue is a political leader who seeks support by appealing to the desires and prejudices of ordinary people rather than by using rational arguments. Now, let us leave Guyanese politics aside. Ladies and gentlemen, there are two big things happening this weekend. One in Guyana, one out of Guyana. Tomorrow is the inauguration. It's a ceremony for President Ali. That, however, does not take away from the fact President Ali is President Ali. He's been sworn in and he took his oath. Of bigger import is the elections, general elections in Trinidad and Tobago on Monday. Ladies and gentlemen, this is very important, not just to Trinidad, it is important to Guyana and the Caribbean. Trinidad has been one of those, I would say, lighthouse countries for the Caribbean. It's held a beacon up high for its progressive nature, for its economic development. And of course, Trinidad stands, unlike Guyana, it has the ability to move ahead, notwithstanding its diverse composition, its diverse peoples, which is like Guyana, but its politics may be slightly and indeed is different from Guyanese. I don't think they are going to have 155 days for them to get an elections result. So we'll discuss that and some more. And I just want to go straight over to Mr. Wesley Gibbens to let him give us an update on what is happening there in Trinidad and how are things looking for your elections on Monday, sir? And is there a likelihood you're going to have 155 days for elections?
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Yog. I'm incidentally no longer president of the the Association of Caribbean Media Workers. I'm on the executive committee, but I do play a role as well with the Media Institute of the Caribbean, which has been focusing on training of journalists throughout the region. So thank you very much for the invitation, and thanks for allowing me to open the batting on a team that includes a Bajan and three Guyanese. It's unusual for the three to be opening the batting. We usually would come in third so that we could keep the runs flowing and break the records. Right, Orin?
Great.
Okay, but yeah, elections 2020. These are going to be some remarkable elections. We have 41 seats, but there are several things that are unprecedented. Of course, the fact of the pandemic. And I think that the pandemic is the overarching election issue, though the competing political parties don't appear to realize that. Because under pandemic conditions, we have had every single social and economic sector in the country affected in one way or the other. And therefore, the headline issues that normally take precedence at election time are all influenced by developments under pandemic conditions, whether you talk about the national economy and what has happened to the energy sector as a result, what has happened to all the sectors. But I have contended in my latest newspaper column that it does not appear from the platform and from the manifestos and programs that are being presented to the electorate for decision making, that there is a pandemic perspective. And the fact that the pandemic is not going to end on August 11th. In fact, we are not talking about weeks or months but we essentially talking about years of the pandemic. So that would be sort of my opening shot.
Yes, thank you for that. And, you know, Wesley, I just want to get this for the interest of our viewers and listeners out there. You have, is it still 19 political parties vying, or has the number reduced?
Yeah, no, it's 19 political parties and 4 independent candidates. It's going to be 150 candidates who are going to be facing the polls. It's not unprecedented that you have a high number of parties or independents. What's unusual or different this time around is that you have a third party that has essentially very little grounding. So it's not as if you have a third force in a way that you had a third force in previous elections via our Congress of the People. We used to sort of roughly equate the COP here with the AFC in Guyana. And they, of course, got into the coalition or the accommodation to become part of the People's Partnership dominated by the UNC. But the COP is running on its own this time.
Great. Thank you. And Mr. Orin Gordon, sir, you are seated in the hot spot as well. You are in Trinidad and Tobago. What might be your independent views? Because I know you are not participating per se in the politics, but what might be your views with what's going on there? And especially, is there any semblance to the Guyanese politics, sir?
Well, there's the racial parallel. The opposition party, the United National Congress, is mainly Indian-based, it's rural, and those were its origins. They resemble, in the Guyanese scenario, the People's Progressive Party, and in the Guyanese scenario as well, the People's National Congress, or APNU, its most recent creation, resembles the People's National Movement, but that is where the similarities end. You made a joke at the beginning of the program about what would happen, whether we're in for a 5-month impasse or that kind of thing. I promise you that if Rowley loses on Monday, we will know on Monday night. That's the first thing. And if he loses, he will concede, and the new government will start the process of taking over the next day. But I have to say that the one authoritative poll that we saw in the last week or so suggests that the People's National Movement will be returned to power. Wesley mentioned the pandemic, and I can't help but thinking that elections now is an exercise in extreme cynicism and opportunism. COVID-19 cases have surged in the past couple of weeks, and I promise you, had there not been an election campaign, measures would have been taken to pull back some of the opening up of the country. I'm not saying that it would have been a full-scale lockdown, but given what we are seeing now today, with 82 active cases, and the fact that the number of cases have surged in the past few weeks, I think that a lot more attention would have been paid to pulling back a little bit of the opening up of the country. And I predict that after Tuesday, just that will happen. And so I want to say again that it is a little bit of an exercise in political opportunism and cynicism.
Thank you for that, Orin. We did see that same play here in Guyana. And ladies and gentlemen, just before I get to Mr. Peter Wickham, let me just remind you that you can get us on YouTube, you get us on Facebook, and also to all those ladies and gentlemen from Pomeroon to Oriala, Leonard, we are being joined via radio all across the country. And of course, we know that in quarantine, our brothers and sisters, they restream and they broadcast this live over television there as well. So wherever you're joining us from, ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to this Room 592, where we unleash the truth. And tonight we are talking a little bit of Trinidad and Tobago politics. And Peter Wickham, sir, you would have been around the scene and you would have been able to you cast your lens upon the electioneering that happens in a lot of the countries in the Caribbean, sir. Is there anything that stands out to you in these 2020 elections in Trinidad and Tobago that would make you say, well, you know, the electorate has something different that they're approaching the polls with rather than the same old tactics and stuff like that? The reason I'm asking you, Peter, is across many countries, it is basically same old. You know, it is basically the same kind of tunes being harped. But what is happening across the Caribbean, Peter, with COVID-19? COVID-19 is going to subscribe to a huge threat in Caribbean mainstay, and that is tourism. And so therefore one would think that this might be something big in the thinking in the region.
Yeah. Okay. I certainly want to endorse a lot of what Orin said as a person on the ground in Trinidad and Tobago, and I agree with him that, you know, I don't believe that any of the drama associated with the Guyana election is going to be replicated. So win or lose, we're going to know on Monday night. Let me just say a couple of things about Trinidad and Tobago's politics so that I don't repeat what Orin would have said. And I've always argued that there are a couple of very, very successful political institutions in the Caribbean. The PNM is one of them. The Antigua-Barbuda Labour Party is also one of them. It is a type of political institution that on a good day, it will do extremely well. On a bad day, it can still win an election. The PNM has probably won more elections in the Caribbean than most other political institutions. One could argue that maybe it is not necessarily having its best time under Keith Rowley. Personally, I'm partial to Keith Rowley's leadership. I think he is a superior leader to Patrick Manning, quite frankly. So I don't believe the PNM is having a bad day. I think anything that is negative happening now is as a result of a national problem that has been created by COVID, low oil prices, etc. So that's the PNM. It's facing off against the UNC. The UNC has not had a particularly outstanding reputation in terms of Trinidad and Tobago politics. I believe that Kamala Persad-Bissessar has demonstrated herself to be one of the less successful leaders of the PNM, of the UNC, I'm sorry. She did take them to power on one occasion previously. However, she had a single term in office. And in the Caribbean, generally speaking, if you're a decent leader, you get 2 terms. I frankly wonder what is Kamala Persad-Bissessar doing in politics still. I think the UNC is searching for dynamic leadership that can match Basdio Opande. I don't believe she is that person, quite frankly. And I think that the election on Monday will be one in which the PNM is returned to office, all things considered. There are 8 seats which I believe are marginals, identified as marginals in Trinidad and Tobago. Quite frankly, the PNM could win all 8 of those. If the UNC is lucky, it will hold on to some, and they will be able to at least, you know, turn in a respectable showing. I'm hearing talk about new forces in Tobago that could make a difference, and naturally they're trying to be the deciding factor. Trinidad and Tobago had won those elections before, but frankly I don't think it's going to come down to that. I believe that the election will be a decisive one. As far as the issues are concerned, Trinidad elections have always been spectacular with Bacchanal, and this one is no different. And I am fascinated at the fact that they have been able to take the Bacchanal and scandal to Facebook and to social media. I've never seen this much drama and scandal in a social media campaign before. It's different to St. Kitts and Nevis. It's certainly different to Guyana. So we're hearing about tiffin, we're hearing about sexual, you know, adventures. All the scandal is being brought and graphically displayed on social media. So those of us sitting in our living rooms in various parts of the world can enjoy what's going on in Trinidad and Tobago in the same way that Orin will be seeing it. But that's the difference. I think when it comes down to it, the voters on Monday are looking at the future of the country. They're looking at the long-term reality or the medium-term reality in which Trinidad and Tobago will have record levels of unemployment like everyone else. Oil prices will continue to be relatively low for the time being. And Trinidad's economy is going to struggle like everybody else's. And I think the voters understand that. So the question is, in that environment, whose hands are safer for you at this point in time? And I think that when one considers the fact that the PNM is the government in power, people are probably going to say, well, you know, our best bet is to return the economy to those same hands that are running it now, and let's hope for the best. My only hope is coming out of Monday that if Kamala Persad is not successful, that the UNC sits down and takes a good hard look at itself and tries to see, you know, where they can find new and fresh leadership to come from. So that's my lay of the land for now.
Thank you, Peter. Wesley, I got a couple of opinions that you know, I solicited, I must admit, from people who were in Trinidad and Tobago, and I'll share one of them with you for your comments, of course. A gentleman who says he has been a very strong supporter of Ms. Kamala Persad-Bissessar said that you know, we are in for another 5 years under PNM. Personally, I think that Kamala went wrong when she was in government and she did not divorce herself from people like Monilal and Ramgalam, and so that kind of affected people's support in Kamala. Is there any truth to that, sir?
I want to come to that, but not directly.
Sure.
But I just want to address something that Orin said, and I just want to challenge him a bit on the view that the easing of the restrictions related almost directly to the fact that we were going into an election. I think that if you follow what happened, Trinidad and Tobago took very, very stringent measures. We were among the first to impose travel restrictions. We were among the first to impose a complete lockdown, albeit not under emergency conditions, in terms of declaring a state of emergency. And the country faced a very real prospect of an economic shutdown, of an economic collapse, I should probably say, because as Orin said and others have acknowledged, the state of the economy pre-COVID was in a very parlous, very difficult situation. You had declining prices, declining production in terms of the energy sector, a whole spiral of events began to set in, leading now to the fact that you have close to a half of the industry set up at the Point Lisas Industrial Estate that are now closed on account of international market conditions and also issues related to the supply of natural gas. So the country went into a phase where, according to the Prime Minister, we had to make decisions in order to balance lives versus livelihoods, or the livelihood of the country itself. So I think that what happened was that you had a gradual easing of the lockdown conditions in order to facilitate, open up the economy more. The country moved very quickly, though I think that the government bungled its management of relief packages that were sent out to the unemployed, those who had lost jobs. I mean, there was a lot of bungling and a lot of mismanagement of those situations, which have latterly been addressed somewhat partially. So I won't agree that there was a sort of like cynical abuse of the ability of the government to clamp down or to open up. I think that it was a very calculated decision based on economic conditions, based on the need to balance the economy and the real threat of the pandemic. Now getting down to the prospects for the UNC. I agree with a lot with what Peter has said. I think that the UNC campaign is making the mistake in 2020 that it made in 2015 by pitching its messaging in the direction of the leader and presenting the leader as the symbol of the possibility of success and progress and that kind of thing. I think that what that exposed their campaign to was a very high level of inspection with respect to the character. She is known for platform gaffes that have very quickly very promptly been absorbed by social media, led by, so this is not only independent thinking, people who are just looking on. I think that the capitalizing on those gaps have been the work of the strategic teams of the PNM. Unlike the UNC, where there have been situations where the Prime Minister did make people a little bit uncomfortable in terms of his public utterances, that I think they did not go to town on in the same at the same level of sophistication and with the same kind of effective use of social media that the PNM has been able to do. Even though, if you look at the lead up to 2020 elections 2020, a lot of the preparations for the launching of social media assault against the PNM and with respect to the election, the UNC were first out of the gate there. You had a lot of very curious news websites that were launched. I have pointed to some of them very directly in my newspaper column. What you notice now in the run up to Monday's election, a lot of them have sort of like dropped the facade of independent objective news reporting, and they have gone the full hog into slander and so on and debate at that level. The PNM has had less of a presence, both covert and open, but I think that they have been employing those avenues much more effectively than has the UNC.
Yes, thank you very much, gentlemen. Yog, do you know that there's three people on this panel tonight they have 100 years of experience in the media between them? Would you believe me if I tell you that?
I'm not going to comment at all.
I can account.
Orin plays
I'm
that in
accounting
back.
for only 10.
Well, I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to say who get more, because Mr. Gibbens is going to say that I'm accusing him of being old, and then Orin might jump in too. So I don't want to
No,
fight. And then there's going to be.
that was a blatant untruth.
I want to ask. I want to ask you, gentlemen, what has been the state of play in Trinidad and maybe the rest of the Caribbean when it comes to a new government coming into play? I bring reference to the Guyana situation and what would have been developing over the last couple hours. When it comes to political appointees giving up power, do they walk away right away? Is there any objections, any fight back? What has been the experience?
I guess it's my turn, so I'll jump in. I just want to clarify something for the benefit of my brother of 30 years, Wesley Gibbons. Clearly, I've known him since I was 5, if it was a math.
That's only 30. We still have to account for the 70, right?
No. Just to be clear, I wasn't saying that the easing of the lockdown was related to the push to have elections. In fact, I thought that the government's management, with the help of CARFA, of the pandemic, was first class. And that is quite possibly one of the reasons that they are going to be reelected. What I was saying is that the resurgence now, and especially in the past 2 weeks, would have, in normal circumstances, occasioned the pulling back of some restrictions. And I want to be very careful with that distinction. And it is my belief that right after the election, we will see that. And so I know it's a strong statement to make. It seems to me, given what has taken place in the last 2 weeks, that pursuing an electoral advantage in the polls at this time is an exercise in cynicism. And this is not related to the management of the original pandemic. This is related to the resurgence of the past 2 weeks. But to Leonard's question, Leonard, would you mind repeating the question? It kind of.
We have a situation in Guyana where a number of political employees, political appointed employees
Yes, the
of the
question of
Ministry of the
political
President,
appointees.
Yes, and there has been a pushback with them being given time after these 5 months to get their act together, get out of the government houses and so on. Um,
Ralph,
I want
Ralph
to ask you.
Gonzalez,
I want to ask. My question is this something that's normal in any other Caribbean territories? Are you aware?
one of the things that's normal in Caribbean countries is weaponized audits. And it is something I wrote about in a Facebook post today. I urge your listeners and viewers to go have a look at it. Um, what each incoming government does is to say that let's look at the books of this entity and this entity and that entity. And any enterprising auditor can find a little something to make sure that Leonard Gildarie is eased out of his post. That is a practice that I would like to see discontinued, but I'm not naive enough to believe that it won't be continued. The question of political appointees has been batted about all day. And, you know, political appointees know themselves. And if you get elected if the election results are known on Monday night, by Tuesday morning, your letter of resignation must be on the desk of the relevant person. Political appointees know themselves. Civil servants, career civil servants know themselves. In many cases in our societies, the distinction between the two are not too clear, which is why, as I said in my commentary today, we need to make sure that the two sets of workers are clearly ring fenced. So the incoming government is going through the process at the moment of, for want of a better phrase, creating space to bring in its own people, and some people are not going to go quietly. I was about to make a reference to Ralph Gonzalez. He said a very interesting thing. He said that on the day before every election, I think he's won maybe 4 terms so far. He said on the day before every election, he clears everything out of his offices and residences, and not even a toothbrush remains. If he wins re-election, he moves back in. If he doesn't, he will already have moved everything out already. Our Westminster influence systems have very brutal transfers of power. We don't have the luxury of 2.5-month transitions such as exist in the United States. So you've got to move very quickly. It happens in mature, for want of a better word, mature democracies like Britain as well. There's the announcement of the election results last night, and this morning the new prime minister is on his way to see the Queen, is on his way or her way to see the Queen. So there have got to be clear guidelines governing transitions that happen very, very quickly and in many cases very brutally in our Caribbean societies.
Thank you.
And Peter, your comments on that, and Peter, whilst you're commenting on that and persons in political appointees and unemployment, when you were on your brass tacks program sometime in March, you yourself would have been the recipient of on-air threats to your person. And this is while discussing Guyanese politics. Is there any similarity in the acrimonious nature of politics in other Caribbean country or in Trinidad or so, sir?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would say that there's a level of similarity across the region, but what one finds there's a nastiness, and I use that with the greatest of respect to you gentlemen as Guyanese yourself. There's a nastiness associated with Guyanese politics that is not really replicated, certainly from my own experience. So I find that in other places, people will cuss and abuse you, and so on. But the direct attacks, and they've not only been that one on the radio was one, but then they had a set of Facebook attacks that were also fairly nasty, most of which I would have deleted, that came across because it was clear to me that supporters of the APNU AFC One saw me as a traitor because they believed that because of the color of my skin that I would not have taken the positions that I had. And then there were others who felt that, you know, that they had something that they needed to defend. And clearly this is what was responsible for it. So I think that there was an extremity associated with it. And some of the rank and file supporters, not the thinkers, a lot of the rank and file supporters that were taking their marching orders from Harman and so on a daily basis would have gone out there and would have been very, and I mean, they're still continuing. This whole situation with the composition of the government, I was saying to someone today who is an Afro-Guyanese who is concerned about the fact that all these people are being replaced and whatnot. I said, look, give these guys a chance to settle down and give them the opportunity to constitute the government in the same way that Granger got the opportunity to constitute his government. I support Orin's position 100% that, you know, when an election comes and you have a clearing of the decks, people who are political appointees should know that there's time to go. I mean, questions of a minister being given a month to move out, I mean, after an election is over 100 days late, that's absolute nonsense. I wouldn't give them a minute to move out. They had enough time that they should have relinquished, you know, the house, the car, the keys to the car, the cell phones, all of those things. You know, you turn them in. This lady in Jamaica, Lisa Hanna, she was making the point that when she lost office and she realized that she was losing office on the night, she ensured that her cell phone, her car, everything that was associated with the government of Jamaica that she was responsible for, the credit card she used, she said everything was parked at the office and waiting for the new minister to take her. And that's the way it should go. The challenge that you're going to have now is there are a lot, Orin, of people who don't realize that they're political appointees. So Harman is now saying that he's on some COVID task force and that's his appointment. And he's saying that he's not a political appointee. And that's probably the reason he's asking for leave. It's rubbish. There are people who work for the Guyana Chronicle who believe themselves not to be political appointees, and they say that they're independent and they should be able to hold on to their jobs. I mean, realistically, how many of those people can serve a PPP civic administration after the way that they have been going after President Ali in the most vile attacks over the last couple of months? Realistically, I don't think a lot of them have the capacity to do it. In a previous life, I served at the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation as a political analyst, and I was supposed to be independent. I was told to be independent, but I was under no delusions that it was a political appointment because I was appointed to a job that didn't exist before the government changed. And then I was appointed to that job by an entity within the government. My appointment was terminated within the life of that same government when the prime minister changed. But ultimately, I understood when it happened that I can't really make a fuss about those things because while you may feel that you operate in an independent capacity, the fact is that what is political in small countries like these has a relatively far reach. So my position is this. I think that we have to give President Ali a fairly wide berth to constitute his government. State corporations, a lot of the heads will have to change. With a lot of the media heads will have to change. Government Information Service, a lot of people in there will have to go. The ministers and whatnot, honestly, they are spinning top in mud because there's no basis on which any of them can talk about they need time to get out of their house and whatnot. That's nonsense. And then there are a lot of other people who are in what we call rank and file positions that are serving a political interest, have to be looked at. In a place like Barbados, the supervisor of elections is sacrosanct, and no one can say the supervisor of elections is in a political position. Your chief elections officer, in my opinion, I mean, if he has not yet resigned, I would hope that that will be coming in fairly short order because there is no way that he can convince people that he is not a political operative at this point in time. But technically speaking, he should also be somebody who is not being looked at. I don't think they're going to move against him. But I personally feel that if he had any modicum of decency, he would suggest that, you know, he would say, look, let me step aside because clearly I have been behaving in a way that's overtly political over the past couple of months. So that's the reality.
I want to agree with what both Peter and Orin have said about this matter. I think that in too many instances, people await the push before they jump. But we have to take a nuanced look at it. in Trinidad and Tobago, when the government changed in 2015, we found that there were people who occupied state positions on account of their technical, because their appointments basically were technocratic type appointments, for which, and it was found that when the state boards were being reconstituted, that they had a lot of difficulty replacing these people, finding new people. So in the first, I think in some instances, it took up to 6 months in some very key state agencies to replace those people. But I think that the convention should be established. I don't think you necessarily need to make it, build it into the regulations or any particular law. But I think that by convention, the resignation should be on the desk as soon as possible, with the understanding that there are very strong possibilities in some instances that people would need to be returned. And what we saw happening between 2015 and 2020, people were sort of returning to the fray, even though they had demitted office or had been pushed, and they started making an appearance. But clearly, the overt political appointments to support government ministers in their work, I mean, those people ought to leave simultaneously with the government minister. And as for a minister continuing to occupy his office or residence or whatever the facility, that's just not on. I mean, that's not in keeping with the finest conventions out there.
So let me ask you, let's take this a step further, please. So they're direct state employees, so to speak, or appointments, sorry. But they're also the semi-autonomous agencies, or the agencies that are owned by a government. How is it advisable that those agencies be treated? So, for example, Guyana Water Inc., a company that is seen to be independent, but it is totally owned by the government of Guyana. The head of Guyana Water Inc. is a former PNC strongman, in fact, son-in-law of the former president of Guyana, Burnham. Yes, Van West Charles. Similarly, you have appointments being made for other agencies that are not directly in bed with a government. How then does the government deal with such agencies? And Wesley, I really like what the three of you said, because indeed it is interesting that persons must give the government a chance to keep them, even, right? So if you're technical and you're that good, the government are going to bring you back to your technical capabilities. Over to you, gentlemen. Orin, you want to go first?
Yeah, Dr. Van West Charles is an easy one. His specialty is general medical practice. His resignation letter should be on the desk yesterday. I mean, Wesley made an excellent point about nuance. In many instances, it is not so easy to identify, and therein lies the problem. So the Rowley government in 2015 ended up sending home a lot of people who were technocrats, but who, for some reason or the other, were identified with the previous administration. And the unfortunate thing in the Guyanese and Trinidad instances is that the people going home look like the base of the party that just lost. So I am seeing a lot of angst being expressed on social media today about the identities of some of the people who have been asked to vacate, whether it's residences or official offices. The identities of the people and the fact that let me call a spade, the fact that they're Black people, right? So this is the unfortunate reality, particularly in our two countries. But just to wrap this point, as Wesley said, the categories are, the line of demarcation is very, very difficult to identify sometimes, which is why we need, and I don't know how we're going to get to this point. Perhaps Peter can help me here, which is why we need clearly codified rules and regulations governing transitions. And we need clear categorizations of various appointees so that we know who would be a political appointment and who wouldn't. But even so, it wouldn't be crystal clear. It could never be crystal clear in all of the cases. And as I said, what incoming administrations resort to is weaponized audits. Say, okay, let's look at the books of Kaichor, Yog Mahadeo, made too many trips to new thriving restaurants on our credit card. Let's terminate him on the basis of waste or whatever. So we need clear guidelines and clear regulations governing these things and governing transitions in general.
Right. Peter, given what the three of you said, you went into it in some greater detail. Orin mentioned it, Wesley also. The impact of social media on the changing faces of politics in Guyana and elsewhere. Is it the new way going forward, sir, that most of campaigning will happen off the streets per se and onto social media? And does it have the same impact in a Guyana as it would probably in a Trinidad? Does social media really have the sway upon, let's say, 50% of the population that is over 40, over 50 years old, sir?
Yeah. No, I think the genie is also the bottle. And as a result, I think this will be the new normal. We've had, this is the third Suriname, St. Kitts and Nevis. We had Anguilla, now Trinidad and Tobago, and Guyana. I think this is the fifth. Suriname. And Suriname, yeah, I mentioned Suriname first. This is about the fifth social media campaign that we've had in the region, and I think that now we've moved in this direction. It's going to be difficult for us to go back, standing at political meetings until all hours of the morning in the night dew. I think that those things are a relic of a bygone era. The impact to me has been positive in that I certainly love the fact that I can enjoy political meetings right in my living room, on my computer screen or on my phone. I was taking in political meetings recently at the beach, and it's a nice feeling to be able to do that. So that's a good thing. The other thing is that in the case of St. Kitts, the meetings were a lot less scandalous because it's very, very difficult to cuss somebody via social media effectively. So I found that in the case of St. Kitts, it brought the tone of the meetings down a lot, and there was a lot less scandal and bacchanal. Trinidad and Tobago, however, has demonstrated to me that it is possible to bring that juicy, scandalous element into an election campaign via social media because it's been done fairly effectively. And I've seen it. There's a clip going around with the former sports minister, Trinidad and Tobago sports minister for the UNC. And I mean, it's epic, the way that he's cussing and carrying on and stuff. Personally, I don't know that type of thing helps because while we will laugh at it in the course of video clips, I think that most of us find that kind of behavior looks very out of place in social media. It doesn't really look like something that will send you out there to vote. So I would say the impact has been positive. It has brought messages to more people. I think it has forced politicians to behave themselves a lot more. And I feel that it is definitely here to stay. And election campaigns in the future, are going to be fought a lot on social media, and there will be a lot less of the hand-to-hand combat on the streets that we have grown to see. And it's a reality that we're going to have to change to deal with. It also will make political campaigns a lot cheaper. And that's something about which I am certainly very happy.
Oh, yeah. Certainly. Yeah. The cost of political campaigns will be horrendous. Wesley, in terms of lobbying and lobbyists and external influence upon any of the Caribbean countries, you would have undoubtedly seen the the calls on and about Mercury and JG and BLS where Guyana is concerned. Is there similar, or to any degree, in the Trinidadian politics there, sir?
Yeah, well, yeah, there's no doubt a certain amount of that, but I think that Guyana is quite exceptional on a number of things, and that was one. I mean, we did in fact have Cambridge Analytica involvement in the last election, and it's now well chronicled in the book by Christopher Peter Wiley, in terms of the involvement behind the scenes of Cambridge Analytica. But the lobbying thing, no, it's not as strong. It's not as strong in Trinidad as it is in Jamaica and Guyana and places where you really have strong diasporic influences on on campaigns in terms of the political inputs and so on. But if I may return to something that Peter was talking about in terms of the fact that we basically have virtual campaigns now. I think it's good and it's bad. It's good. It's very economical, even from our standpoint, journalists, in terms of covering it. But it takes away from us the sort of compulsion to be there where the news is taking place. And being there makes a big difference. Covering big political rallies, covering spot meetings and different things throughout the country, there are all kinds of interesting angles. You were able to see, for example, who are some of the people who you would not have thought would be there that are in the audience. Now, those people have found other ways of associating with the campaigns than the traditional ones. Traditionally, you go to cover a campaign rally and you look in the crowd and you say, there's this guy, and so a photograph appears. There's an ability to interact with people in the crowd to get a feel. And then you can tell in terms of the difference between the delivery of the speeches, that sort of resonance that occurs between the speaker and the responses, the crowd response. I mean, it's not quite the same, but it's almost like football matches these days in Europe and elsewhere. And cricket recently, where the ball races to the boundary and you don't have the camera doesn't scan the thing, and there are things that are about it that are missing. And as Peter has said, quite right, what has happened is that social media are beginning to sort of fill some of those gaps and to provide the resonance and the feedback and the tensions and the things that you feel at a campaign rally. And as a result of that, more and that genie is out of the bottle, as Peter quite rightfully said, because more and more people who would not have otherwise turned to social media to get their news and information, they are there and they're not leaving. And I think that they're not very likely past this period. And I think that this period is going to be with us for a longer rather than a shorter period of time. So we may well have seen an end to some of the traditions associated with election campaigns in the Caribbean.
Right. Orin, same question to you. Your thoughts on those points Wesley just pointed out, but also let's take lobbying, well, not lobbying, in terms of advice and stuff, marketing maybe is the right word to use. So in the case of APNO AFC, they would have used Crosby Textor in 2019, who gave them the slogan, honesty and integrity. Marketing people would say, don't lie. If at the very least in a slogan, you should be very honest. Does Trinidad and Tobago employ the kind of consultants to help them shape and direct their campaigns like Guyana did?
I don't know the extent to which external consultants are involved, but I know a lot of the some local marketing and advertising agencies have gotten involved. Pepper Advertising, a well-known advertising agency here in Trinidad and Tobago, is leading the PNN's campaign. I don't know who is leading the UNC's campaign, but it hasn't been going very well. Let me give you a story of something that happened in the last week. The United National Congress released a pamphlet detailing a strategy to combat and contain COVID-19. And point 7 was a promise to build a dome. Now, defenders of the party said, of course they're talking about a virtual dome. It's not a real dome, but it caused those of us who were initially puzzled by the thing to ask, what are they talking about? Mockery ensued, memes ensued. And before you knew it, they changed it to something else. The thing that I enjoy about living in Trinidad and Tobago is the cleverness of people in society. If you slip up today, 1 hour later you're a meme, and it's usually a very funny, catchy sort of thing. Social media mockery caused the United National Congress to change to change the presentation of a very important pamphlet of theirs. Of course, what they said they meant was a virtual dome, not something you could see, like the Iron Dome defense of the Iron Dome military defense of Israel. And speaking of this, the opposition leader has not, speaking of marketing and wrapping everything together, the opposition leader, Mrs. Besad Bissessa, has not been having a good campaign. She has got the big, fat, rich target of Keith Rowley's 5-year economic record and Colemanberg's economy to aim at. And she has been caught off guard on a number of things, describing the Prime Minister as a blank man, which sounds pretty perilously close to describing his ethnicity. She had to walk that back.
We saw that gaffe.
She said some things about COVID-19 that are not true. She's had other missteps. And the conventional wisdom in politics is if you're explaining, you're losing. If you have constantly to be saying, what I really meant to say was this, you're not having a good campaign. And that is because the lens of social media is so sharp and unsparing that if you only slip up, you become a meme.
Right.
And one more point I want to make very quickly. You mentioned the lobbyists and so on and so forth. In the constituency in which I live, Shigwanas East, this is listed as a barely, not a marginal constituency, but a barely marginal constituency. It's been an old-fashioned fight, the battle of the billboards. Everywhere I go, everywhere I drive, I see big billboards of Clarence Rambarat, the PNM candidate, and Vandana Mohit, the UNC candidate. It seems as fast as somebody puts up a billboard here, the other person counters with another billboard and that sort of thing. So to that extent, the campaign where I live has been old-fashioned.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Orin. Peter, is there, how close would be the election? That's my question. How close will be the election?
I just wanted to make a quick point about the political consultants, because I don't know if you are aware that in a separate profession, that's exactly what I do. So I have been concerned.
I heard that man, somebody.
Yeah, I've been concerned that, persons like myself, Salvin Ryan, and there are not a lot of us in the Caribbean that do polling, and certainly political consultants, there are even less. A lot of times we get sidelined to fairly marginal aspects of campaigns, and they bring in, what we call the white people, the white boys from the United States, the James Carvels and people like that. Yeah, there we go. Nigel Henry is also one. Yeah, I mean, and I remember back in the day, the UNC brought in James Carvell and paid him a ton of money to run a campaign for them. And I believe they lost that one. I don't remember correctly whether they did or not. But we've had the Cambridge Analytica. And I was fascinated that in the case of Guyana, both political parties hired political consultants from outside and paid them quite well. And then in the wake of the election, the APNU AFC went and got another set of American consultants to lobby on their behalf in the United States and paid them another set of money. And I thought that this really said that Guyana's politics was going in an interesting direction where clearly there was a lot of money available to pay some of these international consultants. What I like about the PNM campaign is that even when they were using Ernie Ross, you know, they were using local talent. And to me, there's absolutely no reason why with the region that is as rich in talent as this, we need to be going outside to pull consultants who then have to sit the Peter Wickhams of the region down and say, you know, but how do we do this? Or how do we do that? How do we influence people? Kamala Persad-Bessesse's campaign last time in 2015 was run by a lot of international consultants who seemed to have convinced her that she was matching Keith Rowley in terms of leadership. And, you know, Orin was spot on. Why are you going after Keith Rowley? Because in the final analysis, you cannot match him. I mean, the numbers are fairly clear. You know, certainly my numbers were fairly clear that you can't match him. And I did one poll in 2015 that was leaked into the press. And it was so vastly different to the data that the UNC was clearly looking at on an ongoing basis. And my question was, if she's seeing this kind of information that I produce, why would she believe that she should go after Keith Rowley? You know, go after Keith Rowley's record on the economy? No. I'm not really sure how, you know, as I said, but a lot of times these overseas consultants, the fees are so high that, you know, you get into this Michael Jackson thing where you don't want to tell your client anything negative because that person is paying you so well. And then people like me, foolish me, will come and say the truth. And then, you know, they will say, well, they will dismiss that information because the other information is so much more attractive. So that's a reality. The big ticket political consultants are certainly a reality. And I commend the PNM for, you know, sticking to local talent this time around as well. Jamaica elections, they also use a lot of local talent, and that's something to be commended. But the other question you were asking about how tight the election is going to be, as I said, I think it's coming down to a question of 8 seats. The thing in Trinidad and Tobago is that the marginals are so tight that you can have a swing of 5 percentage points in one direction, and that 5 percentage points could clean up all of those marginals, and you will have what appears to be a landslide. I do believe that the electoral swing in the Trinidad election is going to be around 5 or 6 percentage points. Those 8 seats are within that range of 5 or 6 percentage points, and they could all go one way. And if they do all go one way, the UNC is going to look like a shade of itself, because there's some seats the UNC will never lose, and they will hold on to those. But the East-West corridor, that's the battleground, as always. I mean, every election, that's the case. And if the PNM dominates as many of those as I believe it will, the COP is no longer a factor. If they do that, I think that we will have what is a minimal swing of 5%, less than the previous election, because the last election was a lot more than 5%. But I do feel that the seat count will be significant in terms of the number of seats that the PNM can pick up if things go well. If the UNC is not able in the weekend to come to get onto the ground and to minimize the damage in some of those places.
Thank you, Peter. Wesley, your comments in terms of, we're going to wrap up the program very soon, sir. So I'm going to ask you, and I know you had wanted to leave quite earlier. I'm sorry we kept you. It's been an engaging discussion on the Trinidadian side of politics. Guyanese have been inundated with the local politics here. Your comments, Wesley, would you agree with Peter that it is what it is in terms of the PNM, and as Orin raised that headline just the PNM in the lead? Your comments there, and also when you started, you mentioned a little bit of the gaffe, and I see Mr. One of our viewers here said that Kamala is doing her best to let PNM win these elections. So your comments there, Mr. Wesley, give us, and you know, your closing comments as well. So it's been a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, I agree with Peter. You know, absolutely in terms of his analysis. I would say 5. I'm more tending towards a 5 or 6 marginal as opposed to stretching it to 8. Though I think if you mathematically you can probably make the case for 8 marginal seats. But as Peter and Orin know, at election time, there are other intangibles that kick in, a lot of variables related to voter turnout, for example. The last election, the voter turnout here was a little over 66%. I think that a lot of that would depend. Where we end up is going to be very critical in terms, because there are constituencies where there has been a confluence of events that can have a negative impact on the turnout in favor of the PNM. We have to look at the weather. For example, over the last week or so, we have had some seasonally heavy rains, and they have had flooding events in some of those areas where I would say a solid voter turnout would ensure that these no longer can considered to be marginal seats. There are one or two seats where the margin of the last election was like 500, between 500 and 1,000 votes. And I think all kinds of variables can go in there. But I think that as of now, the advantage favors the PNM. I think that they have incumbency in their favor, though under COVID conditions, incumbency is sharp on both sides, because you also have the fact of the steep economic decline, but you have the record of managing the pandemic in their favor. So I say a lot of variables, a lot of intangibles, and it is a marginal kind of situation in at least 5 or 6 seats. As of now, if the election were held today, I would say that I would give the PNM the edge for sure.
With your permission, can I ask Wesley a quick question? Do you think that there are any seats that are no longer marginal that were in 2015 that have solidified in either direction?
Now, I haven't seen, there haven't been any kinds of developments. I started looking at the changes in the boundaries, because you had boundary shifts in most of the seats to see where the polling stations were realigned and so on. I haven't completed that exercise, but I haven't detected anything that's going to be that can be decisive when it comes to that. And I don't think that we have had any specific developments. I know what you might be looking at, La Hoqueta, Talparo, and that particular seat where you've had, and Yog and others would know that during the flooding events that we had 2 years ago, and those are the areas, and those are considered to be a PNM area. Then you had more flooding over the past few days, and then the weather outlook for this weekend is not very favorable. So it's very possible that you might have more flooding events and a high level of anger. But then that's also a constituency in which you have a very aggressive UNC candidate, well-resourced. She has publicly been doling out a lot of quote-unquote support in the form of refrigerators and appliances to mitigate the effects of the flooding that people think. I think hopefully my media colleagues would do a close examination to see whether people the number of replacement refrigerators match the number of those affected by the flooding. But so those are developments. Those are some of the things that can have an influence. But the margin there was pretty large the last time around, and I don't see that at the end of the day, if there is any kind of change that is going to be so significant that is going to change the bottom line in that constituency.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gibbens. Thank you so much for your thoughts. Well, Orin, over to you, and of course for your closing thoughts as well, sir.
I want to say to Wesley before he goes that Leonard and Yog invited you to room 592, but it's like been room 868 tonight. So I just wanted to make that point before you go. And thanks, Wesley. I'll see you soon, I hope. The thing that I get excited by constituency politics. And, I wish that we had that system in Guyana instead of the list system. I wish that there was an MP that I could say was my member of parliament for Festival City and North Vancouver. I wish Leonard Gildarie would become the first member of parliament for Kitty and Sobrianville, So constituency politics makes you accountable at a local level as a member of parliament. And if it works well, you will defy your party in some instances to meet the needs of your local constituents. But that doesn't often happen in our very tribal two-party political system. But I really like constituency style politics, and I've been enjoying, following closely as I have been the Trinidad and Tobago political situation. Who will win? Who will flip the seat? Will this seat flip from UNC to PNM? The dynamic in my own constituency is very interesting. And I went to have a look at both candidates because they made appearances before the local Chamber of Commerce. I just wish that this is a political system that we would adopt in there.
Right. Thank you for that. And Peter, over to you, and of course for your closing comments as well. And Peter, there is a question that just came in from one of our viewers, so sorry to latch it on to you. It just came when you were about to speak. Are there any dead voters in the Trinidadian list?
Plenty. I'm glad the caller asked that question because Trinidad and Tobago's list hasn't been clean. I believe the last time it was clean was in 2003 or 2004, Orin. Sometime like that. But you have plenty dead voters on your list. Just like Barbados, we have the same, and Jamaica has the same. So this view that Trinidad and that Guyana is the only country in the Caribbean that has dead voters and migrated voters on the list is absolute rubbish. That's part of the APNU propaganda. Trinidad and Tobago's list is bloated because they said the last time they cleaned, I believe it was 2002 or 2003, that a proper cleaning was done with house registration and whatnot. But that's another conversation. I just want to close by making reference to something I forgot to say earlier, that part of the challenge with our Westminster system that we have adopted is that the Westminster system assumes a certain level of decency. So it assumes that when a prime minister realizes at 11 o'clock that he is not winning, that he will concede and that he will make way for the new leader to come in at midnight before the Queen swears in the person the next day. The Westminster system is replete with things like that, where there's an assumption that people will behave properly, that ministers will tender resignations, that leaders of particular government offices will offer their resignation to the incoming minister in the way that gentlemen would behave. The Americans don't deal with that nonsense. You have the spoil system. You're told that you can employ a set of people, and those people understand that the moment that you leave office, they have to leave office as well. I think, sadly, we have to get more of that in terms of our Caribbean politics, where we do like the Americans and we define it, because we don't behave gentlemanly in the Caribbean. And I think that there have been too many instances where, it comes down to, as Orin is saying, you have to go and weaponize the audit to get rid of someone. And maybe what we need to do is we need to do like the Americans and define better the spoils that a minister is entitled to, the spoils that a prime minister or a president is entitled to, and then everyone else has to understand that you're a political appointee and you need to go your way when the time comes. But that's a change that we need to look at making. Gentlemen, thanks again for the invitation to participate. I enjoy talking politics a whole lot, especially with you guys who seem to know a lot of politics, and I learned a lot tonight as I did before. So thanks again.
A pleasure to have you, Peter. Orin, you wanted to say something?
A quick question for Peter. Like the Americans, do you think we need slightly longer transitions than next day transitions, which can be quite brutal?
Yeah, I mean, unless everybody is going to be like Gonzalez, that is going to move out and make way. But I think it's sometimes unrealistic to expect a person to leave office immediately. We've had situations in Barbados where the Governor General has been asked to hold on because the former Prime Minister wasn't finished cleaning out his office yet and that type of thing. There was a situation in Trinidad and Tobago, I believe, when Prime Minister Pat Manning took over from Pandey, that the house had to be cleared and there was a process, and so I like that idea of saying let's have a transition, even if it's a week, but to give the new person the opportunity to decently hand over to the new leader. Maybe that's a possibility for us to think about in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight in room 592. We certainly enjoyed the conversation here from the Guyana end. And I must tell you this, what is intriguing to a lot of people, I mean, you guys are the masters of the game, so to speak, right? You've been around, been there, done that. But for a lot of people who only see election when it happens, they continue to be interested in questions like, are all the elections commissions across the region the same? Are the electoral systems and the polling system, the same? So maybe one day after the Trinidadian elections, we can probably have another discussion where we share with viewers and listeners a little bit of a hindsight kind of thing of how the elections are. Maybe someday we can look at the PR system versus the constitution, the what you call it, constituency system you have in Trinidad. To have some debates and educational things happening with our viewers and listeners. But Peter, Orin, Wesley, it's been a pleasure to have you guys. It's been really a pleasure from Guyana to have you in room 592. And we are privileged and we look forward for a future repeat of this meeting of the mind, so to speak. And let me thank you once again and wish you well, Wesley and Orin. We wish you well. And I want to tell you, advise the PNM and advise the UNC that they would not be in the position they're in if they had taken the local consultants, the regional consultants to help them.
Let me just, as I leave, there's the sound of a campaign truck passing in the area. That's something that has intensified because they no longer have those rallies. So they come to you. And the second note I have is that I'm on TTT on Monday from 6:30 p.m. doing the election countdown.
Great.
We know which station to join.
We certainly will be tuning in. So it's been good to have you, gentlemen, and thank you so much once again. And my co-host, thank you for joining us on this Friday night. And thanks to the Kaito Radio technical team working hard behind the scenes. Ladies and gentlemen, all across Guyana, the Caribbean, New York, USA, the entire USA, Canada, UK, to you all. Have a great night and have a great weekend. And remember, say a prayer for Guyana and Trinidad, but remember Guyana is still the best country in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, have a great weekend. Stay safe. Bye-bye now.